Good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Sherman, a member of the Douglas Congregational Community, and I'm really happy to be able to share with you in this way. I started with good morning because initially this was going to be a homily from our pulpit. Now that the coronavirus is upon us, this is coming to you from my kitchen to your kitchen. As most of you know, this is the last Sunday of Sal's sabbatical, our pastor. And on behalf of the Pastoral Relations Committee, I just want to thank everybody who worked really hard to come together in a spirit of oneness and be the church to each other. Grateful to you all. Many of you know that I am a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Grand Rapids. Many years back, a young woman came into my office for therapy, and since it was an initial consultation, she had not been there before. I started with the question that I always start with: what brings you in? And then I wait. After a few minutes, she looked at me a little bit puzzled and asked, "Aren't we going to open in prayer?" In fairness, it was a faith-based outpatient psychotherapy clinic. And I said, well, we can, but could we talk about it first? What would it mean to you if we opened in prayer? What would it mean to you if we don't open in prayer? What is prayer to you? What did it mean in your family growing up? I really had no idea what she was asking me when she was asking to open in prayer. And I was trying to explore it with her because that's what we do in therapy. She seemed confused and pressed me a bit further with a second request. And we went back and forth with her seemingly trying to press me into a role and me trying to explore what the whole thing would mean to her. She became a little frustrated with me. And finally, towards the end of the hour, I think she prayed and I just listened. After the session, I thought to myself, that was a little rough. And I was not at all sure that she would return the next week. But she did come back. And when we sat down together, she did not say anything about prayer. Rather, she stepped into a great reservoir of anger and bitterness and resentment towards her father, towards the church, and towards God. And she did so with tears, anguish, and a lot of profanity, surprising even her with how angry she was. Over the course of several years, she was able to work through a number of significant issues with her father, with the church of her youth, and with God. And she became willing to let go of some of the comforts and familiarities that these relationships contained in order to free herself of the confinement that they also contained. As we look back over the work that she had done in therapy in anticipation of her ending, we talked about that first hour we sat together with her question to me about opening in prayer. And we both understood after our work together what it was that she was asking me when she asked to open in prayer. She was asking, are you my dad? Is this like church? Do I have to be good in here? It was clear to me that had I complied to her with her request to pray, she would have done some polite work around the edges of her bitterness and hurt and left the darkness tucked away, even from herself. But she didn't do that. She was willing to step into the unknown, into that big reservoir of anger and pain. Stepping into the darkness is frightening. You don't ever fully know what you will find there, but you have a sense that things will be different, that things need to be different, that you will have to change. And she did change. She developed a more adult relationship with her father, for instance, and they are not as close in some ways. But she no longer feels devalued and disrespected by him. She lives freer in that relationship. And uncoincidentally, she also feels more valued in her relationship with God and lives freer in that relationship as well. She was willing to take the journey into the unknown. I'm convinced that to grow, we have to take a journey. We have to leave the land of what is known and venture forth into the unknown. We have to make an exodus. An exodus is a departure, a journey into the wilderness or desert. An exodus is a central metaphor in Scripture. The Israelites, Jonah, Jesus, and Paul, just to name a few, all were thrust into the wilderness. And the wilderness is a hard place. Our old knowledge, our old ways of navigating the world don't work anymore. Our comforts and certainties elude us. We wander in darkness and confusion. We don't know where we are going or how long it's going to take to get out of this place. As an example, consider Jesus' words to his disciples after he left his familiar life as a carpenter and started his ministry. Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Figuratively, he was saying, I have left the world I know and all the comforts and certainties it held for me. Or the Israelites' complaint to Moses, what did you do to us, bringing us from slavery and taking us into the desert? Who is going to feed us and provide us with water to drink? How long are we going to be walking in this desert? We were better off making bricks for Pharaoh. At least our bellies were full and we had a roof over our heads. And I can relate to this. In my teens and through my 20s, I was a part of the conservative evangelical world. I had a religious encounter and an awakening in my teens and started attending a conservative Baptist church. There in that world, I found order and structure. Having grown up in a home characterized by alcoholism and mental illness, my world was quite chaotic. And this conservative Baptist church, with its strict ideology and cohesive subculture, brought stability into my life. And for this, I am truly grateful. This was my world and my worldview. But I found growing up in this world increasingly difficult, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And so I had to leave. And leaving this world took some time, and it was difficult. It was one of my desert experiences. And at times I felt angry and disillusioned and longed for what I had before, even though I felt trapped and diminished in it. Because it was what I knew. It was familiar. But the desert is where God is. The wilderness is where God meets us. And the only way we discover this is to leave home and go out into the unknown. Growth always requires us to leave what we know and enter into the unknown. And this requires faith. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin described it this way. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet, it is the law of all progress that is made by passing through some stages of instability. And that may take a very long time. He continues, and so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time, grace, and circumstances acting on your own goodwill will make of you tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that God's hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of being yourself in suspense and incomplete. So how does this happen? What pushes us out of our comfort zones into the unknown? There are many different starting points. Some of these may be familiar to you. Sometimes we become willing to go into the unknown because the place we are doesn't make sense to us anymore. We grow unsure of what we know. Our old certainties no longer hold up to everyday living. We keep hitting dead ends, and a kind of despair creeps in, and it becomes inescapable that the place where we reside is filled with emptiness. There are other times when we are thrust out into the unknown because the rug gets pulled out from under us. A marriage ends, a business fails, we lose someone we depend on, our political leaders give themselves over to corruption. This is my current desert, where I am asking the question, where are you, God, in the midst of all this carnage and desolation? Or sometimes God just smacks us upside the head, like he did the Apostle Paul. The story goes he was knocked off his horse and struck blind. And sometimes we don't go. Let me tell you the story of the end of my grandfather's life. My grandfather, Stanley, lived to be 102. After my grandmother died, he lived in his house by himself until the age of 100. He was the patriarch of our family, a lifelong Methodist. He was crusty and independent and dogmatic. The transition to the retirement community did not go well. And so after about 6 months, my uncle, a retired UCC minister, came and got him and took him to his home in the UP. There, my grandfather settled in and relaxed a bit. He had a little bedroom off the living room of my aunt and uncle's house and would usually retire a bit before my uncle. A few weeks before he died, my uncle was turning off lights in the living room in preparation for going to bed, and my grandfather called him in with some urgency. My uncle came into my grandfather's room and said, "What is it, Dad?" My grandfather said, "There was a man standing at the end of my bed with his arms outstretched." My uncle, who's a very spiritual person, responded, "Well, Dad, maybe that was Jesus with the message that it's okay to come home." My grandfather, sitting on the edge of his bed, pondered this for a minute and responded, "Yep, maybe it was Jesus, but could you check the top drawer of my dresser and make sure my billfold is still there?" True story. Unlike my patient, who I talked about earlier, my grandfather could not step into the unknown. He had so little faith. Even at the end of his life, he could not let go of the world he knew. Today, I picture Jesus and Stanley laughing about this, with Jesus saying with a wry smile, "Geez, Stanley, you held on tight right up to the very end, huh?" And my grandfather responding also with a smile, "Yep, guess I still have some work to do." Growth requires us to let go of what we know and step into the unknown. So what is the unknown that God is calling you into? Like me, it may mean leaving a faith community or forms of spiritual expression that no longer work for you. It may be starting or going deeper in your practice of meditation or prayer. It may be leaving a job that you hate and starting a business. It may be restructuring your relationship with a family member when you have unfinished business. It may be choosing to make yourself more vulnerable to your partner by sharing more of yourself emotionally. It may be an act of kindness to a neighbor who you don't get along with. It may be allowing yourself to have the experience that has been calling to you, but you have been avoiding out of fear. A trip, a class, an encounter. Whatever it is, let go of what you know and where you are and step into the unknown. God will meet you there. I'd like to conclude with some words from the poet Rilke. I believe in all that has never yet been spoken. I want to free what waits within me, so that what no one has dared to wish for may for once spring clear without my contriving. If this is arrogant, God, forgive me, but this is what I need to say. May what I do flow from me like a river, no forcing and no holding back, the way it is with children. Then in these swelling and ebbing currents, these deepening tides moving out, returning, I will sing you as no one ever has. streaming through widening channels into the open sea. Namaste.